this parent says that she has a son who is 8 years old and he
Mhm.
practices only 10 to 15 minutes a day. Is that sufficient? And she says, when I say practice, I mean just playing the songs from beginning to end a few times per song. I think the teacher does provide practical guidance, practice guidance, but from when he was young, he always wanted to play each piece from beginning to end every time.
That's the age-old question, isn't it?
It's,
Is it enough to play the piece all the way through?
yeah, and I think for a lot of music teachers, it's like, no, please don't. You gotta fix that before you go on. Oh, there's these things you gotta fix. And what's hard, it sounds like, I don't know if this, I feel like that mom is not in the lesson, so she
Mm.
doesn't know probably what's happening. And so my guess is she comes, they come home and he practices, and all she knows is he's playing it from beginning to end. And she doesn't know the small little spots that the teacher has said, oh, make sure to fix this or practice this until this part is this certain way.
And I think the other problem is the child who doesn't, even if you do have a parent who knows where they're supposed to stop, is the child who won't stop. Or, and I see a lot of this, is the child who says, but I don't know where we are now. If you do stop and you do this little section, don't play it the whole way through. But that's the fun of it, isn't it? We don't want to stamp out all the fun of not playing pieces all the way through.
Well, I think I would say reach out to the teacher to make sure you understand what the practice is supposed to be happening at home. And then also, then, yeah, there is the balance. I always talk about you want sort of the fun part, the easy part of practice, and sort of the hard part. So there are, like I always say, let the kid warm up on any piece, and you can't say anything bad about that piece. Just let them
Ooh.
warm up. They can just kind of go for it. Even if they play things super fast and has a ton of mistakes, that's their time to have fun. And then there's the gotta get down to work. And
Mm,
that's when you gotta kind of like divide the piece up and do repetitions.
it's interesting. I love this idea of you get to start off by playing anything you want, and there cannot be any guidance given to there except for just adulation of you playing. And I really enjoyed that and all the things that go well, because does that often happen where you just get to enjoy it and not think about what goes wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And by the way, I'm so sorry for my cat. She's just like
Don't worry,
asking to like for treats and things.
mine's scratching at the door, so I'm like, oh. I think that I love that idea. And I think the other thing is that use of how are you engaging the child in front of you to do the small chunks of stuff. Actually, it was interesting because I was in the Midlands over the weekend with some teacher trainees, and this was actually one of the topics that I was asked to talk about, was how do you get the students and the parents at home to do the nitty-gritty practice. And what we came up with was that you have to be a salesperson. You have to you
I
have to
love
sell
it.
it well enough. So for some children that probably means that they need to understand why they need to get a certain bit correct, because they're quite logical. But for other children, it's got to be because it's going to be fun enough to do it, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it makes it easier once you play it this way many times, and then you don't have to think.
Yeah. Or that you present that nitty-gritty bit with a game if you've got a child that's quite young, for instance, or
Mhm.
even for an 8-year-old. I don't think they're too old to play games,
No,
really.
they're not. Actually, I have teenagers that still play games, and it's
Oh yeah,
just kind of fun.
exactly. So I think at 8 you probably do need to present the nitty-gritty parts, but as you say, it's important to know which bits those are by talking to the teacher first, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I love this idea of the salesperson because a lot of times it is just convincing them, okay, you actually have to do it this way. Saying like, I do know what I'm talking about, and you're actually paying me for this. This is what you want. That's why you're coming here for my expertise, and so this is my expertise. But I think it's hard because parents go home, kids go home, and then they're tired, they're stressed, whatever, and the kids a lot of times are like, oh, I just want to get it done.
Mm.
And I think also this whole, as you said before, playing through the whole piece, and if you're in the middle and you don't know where you are, there's so many kids that just start over again. And then
Yes.
they're like, oh, I don't know where, I'll just start over again. It's like, and sometimes it's like you only hear like the first half of the piece like 5 times until finally you're like, okay, hold on, we gotta change this up.
I think for some parents that would be really difficult actually to isolate out a chunk, especially if you're, don't have your own musical background and try, I often hear it's too fast. They play so fast that by the time it's gone wrong and I've worked out something's gone wrong, I couldn't tell you where they've gone wrong, right?
Yeah.
I just know something went wrong and now we're going to have a frustrating argument over, well, where then? I don't know.
That
Yeah.
is a good point. And that's why it's really the teacher's job to isolate it.
Yes.
If the parent isn't in the music lesson, it's the teacher's job to video it if the kid doesn't know how to practice at home, and just say, okay, when you sit down and you're ready to focus on this piece, before you play the entire piece, you need to do this chunk and you need to do it this way this many times.
Mm.
And then after that's done, then you can play maybe a bigger chunk until you can play the whole piece.
That's so important, actually, isn't it? Having those practice tools at home where you can play along with your teacher is really, really important. Actually, there are some apps out there that do this, and I'll try to drop a link in the comments of wherever this ends up, because there's some apps that do this, and you can section out a bit, and it will just play that bit on repeat, which is quite
Wow,
fun. Yeah.
that's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, so that's been something that we've been experimenting with in my studio, is helping, parents who don't want to wait for the next lesson to find out how do we chunk this out, is
Mm,
experimenting with some of these amazing new apps that are on the scene.
good.
Designed by parents, in fact, a lot of these
Oh,
apps, which is
really?
really cool. Yeah.
I love that. I love that.
I think that's one thing, but I think the other thing is definitely for the child is also, I call this front loading. It's better to say, okay, this bit went wrong, let's do that first tomorrow, and then once you've played that bit right 5 times, then you can play the whole piece, rather than asking them to do it today after they've played the whole piece. Because
Oh,
once you've played the whole piece, you feel a bit like, but I already did it, why are you making me do this again? Whereas it often makes a lot more sense to go, okay, but tomorrow when you play this piece, you have to do this bit 5 times first.
yeah, yeah. I like that. That makes a lot of sense. You're
Hmm.
right, because I'm sure that sometimes the kids are probably like, man, I think I nailed that. And then to then realize, oh, no, this is just, what wasted effort. And so then
Hmm.
putting that to the next day, or at least to the next session of practice, to then say, okay, all right, well, the next session, I will then, become more detailed and then focus on these things.
What do you think about, I think the other thing that was in the question from this parent was they were worried about the amount of time their child was playing
Mm,
for. What do you think about time? This is sort of controversial,
yeah,
isn't it?
it is. I mean, I don't have my students, focus on a certain number of minutes to practice. I give them practice goals, and I basically say, when you hit these practice goals, then you're done with your practice.
Mm.
And but what I've noticed too is that 10-15 minutes of practice is generally just not long enough. I mean, I guess 8, you can kind of eke by with that, but you probably want to be closer to the 20 to 30 minutes, to be able to have the amount of time to really get into
Yeah.
the work, the actual work. Um, so what do you think?
I agree with you. And I think there's something that my mum always used to say, which is if you have a half an hour lesson and you want your child to actually concentrate for a half an hour lesson, they need to be standing in their practice spot for more than, or sitting at their instrument for more than half an hour. And then, once she said that to me, it so made sense, because I was watching these children get to the 22-minute mark and suddenly, collapse, and you go, oh, that's how long you practice for at home. you know Um, but at the same time, I think modern life is crazy, isn't it? And the idea that somebody is going to be able to, at least, you know, in the beginning years, schedule in 30 to 45 minutes of practice every day when you've got every after school club available that every school expects you to be in, etc. now, I think is also unrealistic. So I think having an overall goal throughout the week of, as we were saying before, what's more important is what are you practicing and how well are you seeing the progress. So I think it's more important than you if you're saying things like, okay, over this week we need to repeat that bit that's gone wrong 50 times. How are we going to split that up? And
Mm.
how are we going to then cover our studies or our review and make progress in these three different areas? I think is probably more important than how long, but of course, carving out the right amount of time to be able to get that done is important.
Yeah, I like that. I like this holistic view of practice so
Mm,
that the child feels like, oh, okay, I can divide it how I'd like to divide it, especially ones who want to create their own schedules.
mm. And I think that's really important for those children who are starting to become more independent in their practice, because I remember my mum was always with me in my practice room, and then we changed teacher, and I love my teacher so much, but the first thing she did was she said, "Mum, you can't come in here anymore. You're banned from the lessons, you're banned from the practice room." And it was incredibly frustrating for us both because we discovered that actually I did not know how to practice. And the only guidance we got was you can't be in the practice room. So she would just be sitting in the kitchen feeling really frustrated, hearing me play everything from the beginning to the end, and you know, lying down on the sofa in increments. And I'd be incredibly frustrated because I didn't know how to make it better.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things is I think a lot of teachers are not given the guidance to really help with practice. Because a lot of us, we're fantastic with our instruments. We know what to do, and we know in the moment how to get the child to make a different sound or, whatever. We're guiding the child towards something else. But then the whole act of practice is another beast. And then how do you teach those practice skills to a child? I mean, that's a lot.
It is. I think it is a lot. And this is, you know, circling back to what we were saying earlier about games. I think is such an important thing because actually, if you can teach a child to play repetitions through games,
Yeah.
those skills come back, don't they, when they're older and more independent, and they go, ah, okay, so in order for me to keep track of the 9 times I have to do something, I've got to get a pen and I have to move those 9 pens across the table. And maybe
Yeah.
that's not quite as fun as when someone was standing there cheering me on, but I understand the tool to get it done.
Yeah.
I love this idea. Yeah, passing on the practice skills. I think that's
Hmm.
really important, isn't it? I think that get does is a missing link sometimes.
Hmm. Hmm. It
Mm.
is. I mean, that's sort of the nature of being a music teacher. I mean, at least in the United States, you don't need really any credential. You just start teaching. You can say, "Hey, I learned this instrument. I'm going to teach." And so you have teachers who have virtually no pedagogy experience to people who are like, they go to school just to learn how to teach. And I guess that's what I love about the Suzuki method too. There's this whole method of let's teach these teachers how to teach. And then it was once when I got the training, I was like, oh, this makes it so much easier.
Yeah, that's how I felt too. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I guess that circles right back to your first point, which is always speak to your teacher first.
Yeah, that's right. Make sure you're on the same page, you know what's going on, and that you know what your child is supposed to be accomplishing in each practice session.
Well, I guess that brings me to a sort of spin-off question then. What advice would you give to a parent who felt that they were too scared or too nervous to communicate with their teacher?
Mm. Well, I guess I would say you're the customer. I mean, really, in this business relationship, you are the one that's paying for these services. And so um, at the end of the day, you can decide to take your business elsewhere. But hopefully, especially if your child is with this teacher, you do what you can to make sure that this works most effectively, and that there's many different ways. A lot of times teachers are really busy during the lesson, so you can just text or email or however the teacher wants to be, gotten hold of, and then just say, hey, do you have a few minutes for a quick chat?
If you're really nervous about how your teacher's going to respond to you for wanting to have a chat, then the best way is to ask, how would you like me to communicate with you if we have issues or we have questions? What's the best way? Do you want me to front load them at the beginning of the lesson, because that's the only time that you want to discuss it? Do you want me to send you a message before the lesson? I think each person is different, and finding out that before you have an issue is a really nice thing to have under your belt, like any kind of relationship, isn't it? How do you want communication best?
Yes, exactly.
But I really like your point of, look, you are paying for this knowledge. You're paying for someone to impart knowledge to you. And if you don't feel that you can ask for the knowledge, then, there's a disrupt in the relationship somewhere. And now then you have to decide whether you want to repair it or whether you want to, find a different relationship, isn't it?
And we're all imperfect human beings, like I'm sure I've done things as a music teacher that have annoyed the parents and the students and things of that sort. And likewise, I have felt annoyed by things that have happened from, parents and students. I think that's just part of just being an imperfect human. And so just to realize that, like, we're all just trying our best. And even if you reach out and like things might not feel like you're fully in sync, I feel like the more you try to communicate, the more you try to connect, then I think that there's more chance of making it so that your child has the ability to progress, and that they have more support from both the teacher and the parent.
Exactly. And I think there is a shift in that, because obviously, even sort of 10 years ago, there was definitely this dynamic, wasn't there, where, the teacher is like this professor whose word is law and you can't go against it. And although, of course, we want our children to respect their teachers, at the same time, there should be enough respect coming back your way that you can ask for guidance. I think
Yes,
it's
exactly.
a sign of a not so healthy relationship if you do not feel that you could ask for guidance.
Also, just realized too, because I remember when I was a much younger teacher, I didn't know what to do with parents. Like, I didn't
Mm.
have any type of experience. And it's at this point, I'm like, oh, okay, I know how to connect with parents and things of that sort. So it could be that some teachers just really don't know how to connect with parents. And it's just that's just how they are in that moment. And so I think it's good to then, because I think when parents did reach out when I was younger, I would just be like, oh, okay, all right, I would let them kind of take the lead in terms of what they are wanting or asking about, but I didn't actively come out and say like, okay, let's communicate this way, etc. I so yeah, I think it just really depends on the teacher.
Yeah, and I think it's because of parents having communicated these issues with me that I'm more aware of them. Whereas, when I was a much younger teacher and inexperienced, there's no way that I would have even considered some of these issues that were, coming up. I would have never known that that was an issue if someone hadn't said something, because in my mind, I was like, well, I was 100% clear in the lesson. This is not how it translated at home, or to somebody who's not musical, or somebody who's not living inside my brain. But, as somebody who was not that experienced, I had no idea that that could be an issue. So if you don't bring up the issue, you know there's no chance to find out if there's a way to fix it, really, is it? And most of the time, most things can be fixed. Most things can be fixed.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is
Yeah.
great. I love this.
I am loving this discussion. I have really, really enjoyed this. Okay.